day to you viewers, the Colonel speaking to you live from the Grange for British Imperial YouTube Broadcasting. Today we're continuing with the famous authors in readings from their own works, with number B6. A.E.W. Mason reads from No Other Tiger, parts 1 and 2. I'll turn over halfway through. Here we go.
This is a condensation of the jungle scene from my book, No Other Tiger. The trackers built the platform into the branches of the great tree and shouldered Strickland up. "Sir," they said, "we will return for you at daylight." They stole away with an amazing noiselessness. Not a twig snapped. The faint swish of bushes might have been the stir made by a passing wind. Then that ceased, and only the swoop and chatter of birds above the trees were audible. Then those sounds, too, died away. Strickland had brought with him a case of sandwiches and a flask, and whilst he ate his meal, took a careful survey of the tiny arena. It was a rough oval with a floor of coarse grass, and a solid green wall of jungle ringing it about, except just at one spot, where there was a small break in the undergrowth, black like the opening of a cavern. "That's the path the tiger made," Strickland said to himself. "That's the path I must watch." But the light was already fading. The glade became a place of gloom and shadows. Its walls receded. Strickland laid his rifle so that its muzzle pointed directly to the fast disappearing gap. And as he did so, he noticed a silvery stump of tree just by the side of it. Hardly noticeable before, it glimmered more and more importantly as the darkness fell. "I shall know where to look now," he assured himself with considerable relief, for the swiftly changing twilight transfigured everything. The little round of grass was widening into a prairie. Meters were extending into miles. And suddenly, it was quite dark. He had now nothing to do but to wait. Certain changes took place in the aspect of the night, even to his unaccustomed eyes. The stars came out over his head, were caught in the high branches of the tree, trembled and shook in their captivity, freed themselves, and wheeled on. In a very short while now, the moon would be rising, he reflected cheerfully, and he took from his pocket his watch with the luminous hand. It had stopped, of course, for the hands only pointed to 9. But when he raised it to rewind it, he heard it ticking. It was only 9 o'clock then. It was incredible. There were 3 hours still to run before moonrise.
And we'll find out about that on the other side. This is actually rather enjoyable, isn't it, viewers?
Some time after this, a small bird settled upon a spray, and the sound it made was a clatter which split the night. And later, after hundreds of years, some leaves broke from a bough and pattered down to the ground. It seemed to Strickland that some old watchman from another century had come to life and sprung his rattle in the deep of the forest. "This won't do," said Strickland, and he spoke in a curious, agitated whisper, almost a note of panic. To re-establish himself, he strained his eyes towards the white stump. So long as he could see that, he was satisfied. But even the stump failed him, for without a hint of warning, it dashed across the ground like a white animal. The tension and loneliness of that vigil had indeed brought him to the very edge of reason. But soon he became aware of a change. A light, vaporous, unearthly, tender and beautiful as the sheen of pearls, was welling out in a silent tide from under the rim of the sky. Somewhere the moon had risen, and in her train came sanity. Strickland worked his shoulders. At any moment now, he said to himself, and in the far distance he heard a movement in the undergrowth, a snapping of twigs, a sound of bushes whipping back. By the mouth of that cavern something moved. There was suddenly a great rending of the jungle, and out into the moonlight leapt a man. He was dressed in the shoes, the stockings rolled below the bare knees, and the shorts usually worn by the English in these parts. And he carried in his hand a great bludgeon, which he handled as though it were a dandy's cane. Strickland's first impression of him was of enormous power, the power of an animal, for he moved ever so lightly off his feet. He was lean beyond description, lean of flank and leg and belly, as though for many years he had starved, lean enough to arouse pity. Strickland, indeed, out of pity, would have called to him from his hiding place, but the man turned his face, and Strickland returned silent. The face was not merely haggard and lined, but horribly evil, evil to the point of majesty. He stood out in the open, his eyeballs glistening in the moonlight, the sweat shining on his face, and he moved his head slowly from side to side like a great cobra before he strikes. No other tiger passed that way that night.
Well, how about that? How extraordinary, viewers. Half tempted to go and buy the book, if it's still available. Thank you, viewers, and goodbye.